Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap today, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will be able to access it later on demand. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for any of our panelists, please don't wait, don't hesitate. Just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your question, and we'll get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. And finally, we are going to be doing a drawing at the end of today's webinar for 3 $50 Amazon gift cards. So stick around. Hopefully you will be one of our 3 lucky winners. I also want to point out we are doing 4 polling questions during today's webinar. So please participate, take part. We'd love to hear your feedback. Okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Supercharge Continuous Delivery for Kubernetes with Spinnaker. Our speakers today are Kamesh Pemmaraju, who is Head of Product Management at Platform9. He's going to be joined by Eric Bannon, who is Senior Product Manager at Platform9, and Balaji Siva, who is VP of Product at OpsMx. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me. Kamesh, I know you were going to be kicking off the presentation, so I'm going to put myself on mute and let you get right to it.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Appreciate the introductions there, and we're excited to be presenting our webinar today and talk about continuous delivery using Kubernetes and Spinnaker. By way of quick introduction, I'm Kamesh. I lead product marketing here at Platform9. I've been in the space of delivering Kubernetes and OpenStack and many open source cloud products over the years. I've spent a lot of time with Dell Mirantis and a startup called ZeroStack. And it's been an exciting time in the industry. There's a lot going on around open source and delivering cloud native technologies to the enterprise. So we're excited to be here, and I'd like to quickly pass the ball to Eric for a quick introduction, and we'll finish that up and we'll get started here. Eric, you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Nice to meet everyone. Thank you for joining. I am the Senior Product Manager for our Managed Kubernetes offering, as well as our Managed Apps initiative. Prior to this, I had worked at Mesosphere in the field, as well as leading field engineering for Turbonomic prior to that. So very excited to be in the container space after coming from the VM world, and looking forward to this webinar.
Thanks, Eric. Balaji, quick intro from your side.
Hi, this is Balaji Siva. I run products at OpsMx. We basically commercialize Spinnaker, which is a CICD platform. We also add value for enterprises to adopt Spinnaker, things like onboarding and a few other things. We will talk more about it. Thank you, Kamesh, for the invite for this webinar.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, folks. We will kind of get started here. We'll start with kind of talking about Kubernetes itself and why it is such a great opportunity for CI/CD deployments, and talk a little bit about the challenges associated with running Kubernetes at scale. So we were at KubeCon Barcelona a couple of months ago in the premier event where Kubernetes and and related technologies are talked about. We did a survey at the event, and we asked people about what their main use cases are for for Kubernetes in particular. And the answers came back specifically, and you can see here the results of the survey. The top use case turns out to be DevOps and CI/CD automation for Kubernetes, followed by modernization of their legacy applications, again in the containerization context. And the third one was automating app operations. So if you think about Kubernetes itself, it's become such a powerful next generation open source platform. And the benefits obviously accrued to developers. Developers started off with Docker containers. They saw the power of containers, how easy it was for them to package up their application code and put it in a container and just run it anywhere. They started off by running it in their laptops and they're in their own dev environments. So it became a very popular platform amongst the application developers for automating and scaling and managing their applications. And that is how it all started. And at some point, you needed to take those applications and put them into production. And that is where Kubernetes and CICD came in, right? So the fact that Kubernetes has a lot of built-in features that makes it ideal for CI/CD is what attracts many of the DevOps teams. So if you think about how development teams wanted visibility into the operations deployments, right? So that's where the rest of the webinar we were going to talk about that. So the idea is when you are in production and you have a production outage of some sort, development teams wanted visibility into that. Developers and operations teams have always been nervous about deployments. Because maintenance windows and downtime, these are things that can disrupt a business operation. So traditionally, the operations teams have been very guarded about their territory and making sure that the deployments are protected and there's no downtime and nobody can interfere with the ability to get their job done. And of course, in a situation where you're deploying constantly, that can be a big issue. So Kubernetes is, of course, allows a lot of things and very powerful building blocks that allows you to do centralized configuration. It operates on a declarative model, as many of you may be familiar with. You describe a desired state, and Kubernetes will try to achieve that. So you can have easily readable YAML files to describe the state that you want. And then define for example, with a YAML configuration, you can define anything from an application load balancer to a group of pods to run your applications, and Kubernetes does the rest, right? So a lot of powerful built-in features is what makes Kubernetes so attractive. One of the things we see often in our customer deployments is many enterprises have multiple development teams, and they have their independent code bases. They are either writing a particular portion of the application stack, whether it is a web service or front-end service or a database service. They're basically working independently of each other. But as you can imagine, a large application actually requires all those services to talk to each other. And again, that's not easy. Figuring out how all the services can communicate with each other simply and consistently is no easy feat. And again, Kubernetes comes to the rescue, right? So there's a service discovery piece, there's automated routing between services. All you do in Kubernetes is define a service, for example, a user service, and anything running in that same Kubernetes namespace can send a request to that service, and Kubernetes does the rest. It discovers, it figures out how to route that request. So making these services talk to each other becomes extremely easy, even in a multi-tenanted, multi-team sort of environment. So all this really helps in making a continuous CI/CD type of environment easier with Kubernetes. And today you will see in the demo some of the things you can do with Spinnaker. Things like blue-green deployments, canary deployments. When you go into production, ideally you don't want to switch everything to a new version immediately. You want to test it out. You want to see how it works. You need to have a whole pipeline of testing and UAT, etc. You'll see how all that works today. And once you have something in production, let's say you do a canary deployment, you kind of spend a small percentage of your users by routing your traffic through your load balancer to that new deployment, a smaller version of it, and you want to monitor how things are. So you want to see how the performance of the new version is. And you can do things like Prometheus monitoring, which we will briefly talk about in the demo today. So you can see how quickly you can determine how your application, the new version of your application, is performing in a canary deployment, and if necessary, roll it back if it's not performing very well and go back to your old application. All of this is very hard to do in a traditional environment. With CI/CD and Spinnaker and Kubernetes, all of that becomes extremely easy. So at this point, let's do a quick poll of the audience and see, their journey into Kubernetes and where they are. So let's do this question.
So we got the first poll out. Where are you with your Kubernetes journey? You can select one of the following: learning, education, testing, or production. Go ahead and get your answers in. And I also want to remind the audience while we are waiting that we are going to be taking questions during the Q&A period. So if you have a question for any of our panelists, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel at any time during the discussion, and we'll get to as many as we can before the end of the webinar. Okay, looks like we have a quorum here, so I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll here in 2, 3, 1. Okay, closed it out. Here are the results. Looks like the majority of folks are still in the learning and education brick, if you will, in their Kubernetes journey. So does that sound about right to you, Kamesh?
That sounds about right. A lot of people are still kicking the tires with Kubernetes, so learning about the technology, testing it is about right. And production environments, it's interesting, 25% of the audience is in production, and we'll talk about some of the challenges with production shortly. Let's do the second question.
All right, great. Here we go with the second one, pushing it out now. What are your biggest Kubernetes challenges? Is it operational complexity, access to Kubernetes talent, migrating legacy apps, achieving high availability, or data management and user governance? So everybody, that should be on everybody's screen. So go ahead and make your choice. It is just one choice. Oh, actually, it's multiple choices, so you can choose as many as you want. And we'll give folks just a few more seconds to go ahead and make their selections. Then we'll close it out and take a look at those results as well. So let's see, we got about 5 or 6 more seconds, and then we'll close it out. Then 3, 2, 1. Okay, closing it now, and here are the results. The biggest Kubernetes challenge seems to be operational complexity. That I would think would be a no-brainer. What do you think, Kamesh?
Yeah, absolutely no-brainer. I'm surprised that the access to Kubernetes talent at 6%, that doesn't seem to be an issue. Although we're seeing there is a significant lack of talent out there. So anyway, well, that seems like this audience seems to have the right people, access to the right people.
Either that or they're not far enough down the road that it's an issue for them yet, but it will be. But okay, so should I go ahead and throw out the last poll?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, all right, great. Last one here is, which environments will you deploy Kubernetes clusters? Again, this is a multi-select question, so go ahead and choose as many as you want. On-premises, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, or hosting provider. Again, select whichever ones fit your organization the best. And quick reminder also, folks, that at the end of today's webinar, we're going to be doing that drawing for 3 $50 Amazon gift cards. So hopefully you'll be one of our 3 big winners. And we're almost ready to go ahead and close out today's this last poll for this section. So we'll do it in 3, 2, 1. All right, closing it out now. And here are the results. AWS, the clear winner here, which doesn't surprise me. What about you, Kamesh?
I'm not surprised. The percentage of on-prem is also not surprising. We have seen from our discussions with customers and other conferences, a lot of people are actually also deploying on-prem. So this is very much consistent with what we're seeing out there.
Excellent.
Yeah,
okay.
Let's close out the polls. This is fantastic. Really appreciate the audience giving their inputs. Just I'll continue with the rest of the slides. And here is for those of you who are not yet in production, it's pretty clear from the polls. Even those that are not in production have already stated operational complexity, which is actually what we call day 2 operations. When we talk about day 2 operations, the third box there on the slide, Kubernetes and all the associated technologies are built by open source communities, and they don't necessarily solve for day 2 operations. And when I say day 2 operations, it's your day-to-day stuff. If you're an ops person, you know what I'm talking about. It's keeping the system up and running every day without any downtime, having an SLA for your end users, monitoring the system constantly. And if there are issues that happen, you get alerted and troubleshoot them quickly. And this is not trivial for a system that is at large scale. If you're running hundreds and hundreds of containers and thousands of pods or what have you, troubleshooting those issues. And you don't want to be paged at 2 a.m. at night when something goes down, and especially if your operation is business critical, you'll have a big issue in your hands. So day 2 operations is definitely an issue, and operating it at scale is complex. So clearly that's an issue. Multi-cloud, we just saw from the poll that people do have multiple environments where they deploy Kubernetes onto, on-premises, AWS, Azure. What we see, especially with large environments, is people do use all of those things simultaneously. Now, they don't necessarily tie them or integrate them together, although we have seen some customers ask for portability of their applications across clouds. They don't want to be necessarily tied into any proprietary APIs or any specific things that a particular cloud provider offers, right? So for example, databases on AWS could be something you cannot easily migrate off of. Now with Kubernetes, the beauty is, of course, that it can become that abstraction layer that can work across clouds. So you still have to manage across those clouds. You still need to have some sort of visibility and governance across all of that. So that is still a challenge. And once you get into large scale production, you'll see that as an issue. Now, Kubernetes is obviously evolving very fast. There's a new version that comes out every 3 months. And so you have to deal with upgrades in production. And now that's part of, when you do CICD, and you'll see that in the demo today, it's really more around the deployment of your application. So Spinnaker helps you with deploying applications very quickly. You can deploy to various clouds. But what about the underlying Kubernetes itself? How do you deploy? How do you upgrade that? That is also a challenge. Now, people in this poll said they don't have an issue with talent scarcity, but I will tell you, it is an issue in the industry today. Many of our customers are struggling with this issue. The operational complexity and requires operational skills. And running these things at scale is, there's not enough expertise out there. People may know how to contribute to open source, they may know Kubernetes, but they don't necessarily know how to run it at scale. So that's an issue. I just want to spend a few minutes really quickly before handing it over to Balaji on what Platform9 does. Platform9 delivers Kubernetes as a SaaS service. So we have a cloud control plane. In this chart, you'll see the top box is our control plane, which is running in our cloud, in our data center. And from there, we do a lot of the management of Kubernetes deployments and day 2 operations across any infrastructure of your choice. So if you want to deploy Kubernetes on bare metal in your data center or in an AWS cloud or on the edge, it's very easy using Platform9 with a few clicks to deploy Kubernetes there, and our control plane manages a lot of the day 2 operations, including monitoring, healing, remote upgrades, security patching, and we even have an expert team that's on standby 24/7 if we need to go fix something at midnight where you don't want to be disturbed. So we manage our control plane, and our team manages your clusters so you don't have to. So that's kind of our service. And I'll just spend a few minutes on a few capabilities. We already talked about day 2 operations. So our offering eliminates complexity completely from your team, so you can focus on your applications and the delivery of those applications and spend time building CICD pipelines and accelerating your developer productivity. While we take care of HA, diagnostics, zero-touch upgrades every 3 months or 4 months whenever we get a new version. There are security issues that happen in Kubernetes. We patch your servers automatically, and we have certified Kubernetes experts that are available 24/7. I mentioned centralized management because there are multiple clouds, multiple environments. You want to have some sort of a single pane of glass, and you'll see that in a demo later on that Eric is going to show you. You can actually see all of your clusters in one pane of glass. You can see how many resources they're consuming. You can set up granular RBAC policies. You can set up quotas. So that allows you a single place where you can manage all of your Kubernetes clusters. So which really helps you with governance and compliance, reduces your costs, and improves utilization. The one thing that you will see today is this whole concept of application deployment using a single clip. So we use Helm charts, and we have hundreds of applications in our pre-built application catalog. And from there, you can just click a single button and it'll deploy your applications if you want. You can create your own repository, or we have hundreds of open source applications you can deploy. Spinnaker is something that we had deployed earlier, and Eric will show what that is shortly. So that's a quick overview of why Kubernetes and a little bit about Platform9. At this point, let's jump to the next poll and see where people are with Spinnaker.
Awesome. All right. I just pushed the poll out. Where are you with your Spinnaker journey? You can select one of the following: learning, education, testing, or production. As always, I'll give the audience a couple seconds to go ahead and make their choice. And while we're waiting, another quick reminder about the questions. If you have a question for, at any time during the webinar, you have a question for our panelists, please use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. And we should have about 10 or 15 minutes near the end of today's presentation if all goes well. So we should have plenty of time for audience questions. Okay, I'll give the audience about 5 seconds more to go ahead and get their answer in, and then we'll close it out in, looks like 3, 2, 1. Closing it out, and here are the results. Most folks are just learning. They just want to learn about Spinnaker right now on their journey.
Yeah, that's not surprising. I think Balaji, you might have some insight into this polling answers, and I'll pass the ball to you so you can take it from here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think definitely there are a good adoption of Spinnaker in production, but if you look at the potential places where people are still struggling with existing CICD, I'm not surprised that at least people are still in the earlier phases of learning about Spinnaker. So you come to the right spot, I guess. So I'm going to give you a short overview of Spinnaker and point you to where they can go for additional help. The Spinnaker itself is a great tool that was originally created at Netflix that allows you to actually take it from code to production in a full CI/CD fashion. We will spend more time on it. Let's go. I guess we can go to the next slide here.
Yeah, you have control now.
Got it. So if you look at a traditional CI/CD, this is sort of the pipeline you kind of expect from a code to production. You have your CI portion that essentially you're deploying, you're building new versions of software, you're testing it, and then having multiple versions of it. And then once you're done with all the testing, you store in an artifact storage, and then you essentially then start to deploy to production. You could have multiple stages of multiple places to deploy, or you have a staging, and then you go to production. So if this is what you call a typical CI/CD process. And there are multiple challenges that exist in today's environment in trying to deploy applications in a seamless fashion. The primary thing that you see most people almost, I was just at the Jenkins last week, and was talking to many of the users who stopped by in our booth. And if you look at it, most of them are using Jenkins. For the CI portion, it works fine. For the deployment portion, essentially they're doing custom scripting for every one of the services. That means that if you have service one, you have to do custom scripting, not only where you deploy, how you deploy in terms of different kind of release strategies, in terms of monitoring and rollback. All of those things are done in a custom fashion. And obviously, as you can expect, as you start increasing your microservice adoption with the Kubernetes here, you're going to see lots of those services. Before, you maybe have one monolith or 10 monoliths or 50 monoliths. That velocity wasn't a big factor for you to be able to deploy to production. But now you break up a monolith into 50 microservices, then you think about imagining creating the custom scripts. It is really a legacy method of doing things. And then the process is another big problem in terms of handing over the control. Like once you've done the the build, for example, how do you hand it over to the test? Once you're done with the test, how do you hand it over to the load test? Or once you're done with that, how do you hand it over to different places? How do you deploy all of these things in different? You may have different places to deploy your staging versus production versus dev. How do you do all of these things? These things are done out of band manual process. So those things doesn't give you the visibility end to end from a developer or from the ops. Where is it in the pipeline? Where is it in the process that particular update is going through? You have no way to audit this because there's some of them are offline processes. So these are some of the challenges that exist today. Next slide, please. All right, so today we're going to talk briefly about Spinnaker, which is basically a continuous delivery for enterprises. It's basically a modern way to deploy applications from code to production. One of the key things Spinnaker provides is an open source product, so that means it's like similar to Kubernetes. It is an open source, a lot of contributors, and we will talk about that in the next slide. And it allows you to do multi-cloud continuous delivery for software releases. So things like, if you look at from a product maturity perspective, you have quite a bit of large enterprises adopting Spinnaker, like Cisco, Box, and this obviously is a small list of customers, but you have quite a bit of customers, quite a bit of end users that are using Spinnaker in their production environments. We also have an active community, we have a Slack channel of 7,000 plus users, and also actual contributions from quite a bit of number of users from different community. The other big part of Spinnaker is essentially it's a CICD tool, but the way it supports all these different platforms, all AWS platforms, from containers to functions to VMs, and similarly to other providers, as well as on-prem providers, etc., is because there's something called a cloud driver that allows you to abstract away all the complexity of doing deployments, and the providers themselves maintain these cloud drivers. That makes it a very compelling way to really reliably deploy to multi-cloud through this tool. So what the product does is, if you look at the modern requirements for CI/CD, is that the developer needs to have visibility. He needs to, first of all, if you look at it from a day zero, day one operation, is that they have Jenkins today, and they're trying to onboard a new application over to the deploy process. And it is not a simple process. It is actually, you have to write scripts, you have to coordinate all the offline things we talked about. It's really complex. So with Spinnaker, you're really getting an easy to onboard. You can actually developers can self-service themselves to onboard applications and deploy applications. And obviously with controls, we'll talk about the operational point of view. And then you're able to manage the pipeline, how you want to deploy this as a code. So you have ability to maintain different versioning, and you can customize the different the pipelines. For example, one can clone a pipeline. For example, they have ability to have templates that they can use to start off with some base pipeline, and then customize it based on extensions. From a developer perspective, you have visibility to where the particular update that you just made is in the pipeline. Is it in production? Is it not in production? Did it fail in the test staging? Why it failed? All those kind of diagnostics the developer can have, which is really helpful to provide the feedback loop that the DevOps process is looking for. Right? You now ability to really get that going. The last part is some of the common strategies. If you want to do Canary or Bluegreen or whatever strategy you want to deploy your applications, these are all available as off-the-shelf, immediate built-in strategies. So a lot of people can just use that strategies. From an operator perspective, you're looking at how do I control all of this? And now that it enables these end developers to deploy their applications, which is what you really want to accelerate the software delivery for itself. But you want to be able to control who can deploy, what they can deploy, when they can deploy, who can approve the pipeline, who can see the pipeline. All of those things are built in as part of Spinnaker. And we talked about templates briefly. That allows the operator to control how the pipelines are used by developers. So it's not like anybody can create any pipeline. you can have a best practice template that's available that can be used to for developers to quickly onboard, and the operators can control that. Sorry, to go back to the slide, please. Yeah, so the other things you can do is you can set up things like manual judgments, because essentially if you have a process that's not automated today, then you can actually set up a manual judgment that allows people to still use the CI/CD full process, but be able to have the human control that they want. We already talked about ability to analyze risk, so this can be analyzed in an automated fashion as well. So we have at OpsMx, we have a product called Autopilot that really looks at logs, metrics, APM to analyze risk of each release as it gets deployed through Canary or Blueprint, etc. This allows you to do, really eliminate production failures because as you increase the velocity of releases, you're going to have production failures because you can't verify everything else. So the automation helps you out. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so very quick pitch about the OpsMx. OpsMx, we have an open enterprise Spinnaker, which is basically an enterprise version of the open source Spinnaker, just like I guess everybody's doing with Kubernetes. You have obviously you can go deploy the open source version. You may not get support, etc. So we offer support for open source as well if you just want to use open source. But we have an enterprise version of Spinnaker. We call it Open Enterprise because it's not a forked version. We just add value alongside the open source. What you get out of it essentially is this automated deployment, repeatable deployment for every release, every applications, and you get the multi-cloud and the safe strategies built in, and you get the visibility, the verification, and also the application management. And we'll see in the demo how the application management can be done from a doing deployment, post deployment, etc. So let's go to the demo. Eric, take it away.
Yep, awesome. Let me just make myself presenter. So, okay, bear with me, folks. And you should see my screen now. So I'll quickly go through this. I want to make sure we have time to go through the main portion of the CI/CD pipeline that we've been describing and that we have deployed on Platform9's managed Kubernetes clusters. So today, let me just quickly go over what you're seeing. What you're viewing is our self-service portal. So this is a management plane that we host on our internal private cloud. So from this area, you would be able to use the UI or the API to provision upstream Kubernetes and bootstrap that to any number of environments. As you can see here, I've got 2 local environments running bare metal. I've got an AWS environment. This is actually the AWS cluster that we are running Spinnaker and OpsMx workloads in. We'll get into that in a minute. I also have VMware running as well as Azure in this environment. So from a single centralized location, it's pure upstream Kubernetes. We are able to install our host agents and bootstrap this so that they phone home. Our central NOC is able to monitor this through 24/7, 365 enterprise grade monitoring for all types of Kubernetes SLA events. They're able to triage it on your behalf, auto-generate tickets, and from this rich set of APIs and the UI, you're able to add enterprise functionality for some of that operational complexity. So what we've done is we've taken our application catalog, which is just an open source community catalog of all the Helm charts in the community. We've actually deployed the Spinnaker OpsMx workload, which you can see here. And what that consists of in the environment is a series of different services and pods that we have deployed. So what I'll do is I'll go to the OpsMx namespace. You'll see that we have various things deployed for Spinnaker and some of the components that Balaji was describing. Spingate, some of these other ones which have interesting names, Minio, Redis, all the different components that are deployed to make this possible. And then what we've done is we've exposed these over services, obviously, to access the user interface and all of the different environments. So you can see in a minute, we'll be going to showing you how we can use this for the CICD pipeline. And we've also created a sample app in a developer's namespace. So this is going to be the sample app that we're going to be doing a blue-green pipeline on. And that should show you a example of this going from a development environment to our production namespace, where the pipeline will ideally finish its intent. So with that, I want to make sure we have enough time to show this. We'll come back to some of the other things we can do, like RBAC and Prometheus, but I'll hand it off to you, Balaji, so you can show this running on the AWS environment that we have provisioned.
Great. So hopefully you can see my screen. So this is a Spinnaker UI. Basically, you get to see that the applications you're running. In this case, we're gonna focus on obviously this app that Eric just talked about. So this is the primary UI where you, from a Spinnaker perspective, there's something called application, which is basically the ability to have multiple pipelines underneath it. The pipelines each could be a microservice, for example. And then Spinnaker also provides the ability to look at the infrastructure. That means that you can actually look at the clusters that got deployed. So that's the visibility part I was talking about. Not only you do the CI/CD process, but you can also see visually and do some actions around the deployed artifacts. So in this case, there's one instance of specific version running. You can also look at the load balancers and firewalls right from here. And then there's a concept called accounts, which is basically how you can configure different, in this case, clusters or different clouds. So you could have AWS, GCP, the n number of things that the Spinnaker supports, and they're all available in the concept called accounts that you can create, and the developer can just use it. From an operator perspective, you can just create it, and the developer can use it. So in this particular case, we have a pipeline. I think my colleague just triggered a pipeline basically that essentially is now made some change to the existing production version, and it's right now building. You can see the status is running. It actually shows you the various stages. If you look at this pipeline, which is the executed pipeline, you can see that it has the build stage, and then it has a staging deployment. So staging deployment essentially means I can select which account I want to deploy to. In this case, that's basically the developer's default namespace. And then I can also deploy to production the same pipeline. In this case, the account is different. Essentially, the production cluster that's be there. And you can see here, you can visually define pipelines. I can add a stage. So if I want to do some stage, I can say add a stage, for example, and then I can create a different types of stages. So you have different kinds of stages that you can enable, and you can visually build this pipeline out. And essentially, so in this case, once it's deployed, you can actually see what's deployed. So in this case, you can, like I was there before, there's a dev cluster, the default namespace, where you can see the versions deployed, and this is a production namespace. So here, this is the production app right now, and if you look at this particular application right now, this is the current version running. I think I think I need to make sure I enable the right. They're saying greetings. So this is a pet store. We have a cat and a dog pet store, and this is a background version. So what the developer just did is he's going to change it to blue. Now it's blue. I don't like this blue. He's going to change it to green. And then the pipeline just got kicked off, as we talked about. It's now here because they're waiting for verification, basically, of that particular step. So in this case, I can look at what is deployed. In this case, I'm going to go to the clusters, and so this is the version that got deployed right now. It's just still waiting for approval. So I can look at what is the version. I can again make sure that I have the right port number here. And so now it's green. I like this green. So now I can go to this. So this is, think of it as somebody looking at an application, verifying the application is good, and then they can go back and approve it, right? So you can do the manual judgment stage, You can also automate it. In many cases, we have an automated way to do it, but in this case, it's a manual judgment state. So I can say now I'm going to say success, and that means it's worked. I mean, I can set up whatever the input I want to have here, success or failure, or any other text I want to put. But essentially now I can say I verified it, it's good, and then continue. Then it'll go to do the production deployment. So in a few seconds, you would see that the production deployment would also be green, like we talked earlier. This is the old production version, and it'll basically turn into green when I guess refresh, or if I change it. So that's how simple it is. Essentially, from a developer perspective, you're able to set up the pipeline. You can use an existing template to set up the pipeline. You can add stages to these stages, and you can deploy to various clusters. You don't have to worry about doing any scripting at all. All the things I just showed you doesn't have any scripting. Here, the staging is set up as a rolling deployment process. So you can see there's a rolling update, and the production is a blue-green deployment. So you can set up any of these things without having to do any coding at all. So that ends this particular part of the demo. So I can, Eric, you can take it away.
Sure, I was on mute. So great, thank you. So I want to make sure we have time for questions. We'll just briefly touch on a couple things, and then we'll leave about 15 minutes for questions from the audience. So going back to what everybody had talked about in the beginning as the biggest challenge in operational complexity, I want to highlight a couple things here. One, this is pure open source Kubernetes made easy for developers and operations. So from an operations standpoint, one of the biggest challenges around satisfying developer needs for CICD is they have very specific requirements around namespaces, around access, around having environments and resources available, being able to quickly provision that, quickly auto-scale to the needs of that, being able to monitor those underlying infrastructure components for health. One of the key things here is being able to define role-based access controls. So for those different environments, like production, and that's just because I'm not on the right cluster. For production and developers, if I wanted to create specific role bindings for each, that can all be done through the UI. I can apply cluster roles or role bindings to multiple clusters or namespaces simultaneously. So you don't have to be an expert in the API. All of this is done through the Upstream Kubernetes API. I'm able to create namespaces. I'm able to manage all the pods and services from either the UI, or I can also simply download this as a kube config, and I can export my kube config for the cluster, and I can access this just like any other resource. So you can see here we have the production workloads running. If I wanted to look at the developers namespace, I can also view it this way, view the REST app that we have deployed. So all the different types of actions that you would use with Kubernetes are basically the same. You just have the ability now to manage this in a self-service type of way. From a developer standpoint, you guys will not have to know the difference of whether this is Platform9 or just normal Kubernetes. It should be as seamless as being able to provision through the app catalog or your own Helm repos or your own CICD pipelines, knowing that the resources will be available to you to use in this environment. And then one of the last things we'll just touch on, which we won't really get into too much, is our Prometheus, our managed Prometheus offering. It's currently in beta. But developers, this is designed for developers, not operations teams. So when I say that, what this allows you to do is create very robust monitoring instances for your applications, including alerting rules, all tied to the Prometheus operator, and a very easy UX designed around this. So when you deploy that application, you don't need to be an expert in monitoring. You don't need to wait for an operations team to necessarily set up an instance for you or give you access to a centralized Prometheus instance, for example. You can have access to provisioning as many as you want within your namespace. Operations can see what is deployed, and you're able to essentially create your own service monitors, your own alerting rules, your own your own monitoring for your applications and whatever metrics you're exporting up to Prometheus. And this allows you to really manage the full life cycle of the application and have that self-service delivery type of experience. So we'll save that for another day. There's a webinar link that we have. You can look up for our Prometheus demo, which we've done in the last several weeks. I'll hand it over to our moderators for Q&A, and we can begin asking the audience any questions if they have any.
Okay, great. Yes, if you have a question for any of our panelists, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel. Let's see, let's dive right on into the questions we have received. First question here, let's see, is Flannel the recommended network backend here? Is it okay to use other network backends like Calico, etc.?
Yeah, great. I can take that question. So yeah, we support Calico, Flannel, as well as Canal. You're able to specify which network backend you want to provision during the cluster creation. So it does not matter which network backend you use.
Okay, great. Next question, is Spinnaker easy to upgrade? As in, does the instance become a snowflake?
Yeah, so I think there's a clean way of upgrading Spinnaker. Basically, if you look at Spinnaker, it's almost a 10 microservice Kubernetes application. So there's a feature, called Halyard that allows you to upgrade between versions seamlessly. We also at OpsMx, we also have a lifecycle management for Spinnaker, so that you can deploy multiple versions, manage multiple versions, upgrade multiple versions with fairly easily.
Okay.
But definitely it doesn't have the OpenStack kind of a situation going on. So it's not a snowflake. It's fairly tightly controlled.
Excellent. Okay, great. Next question here. It's a little more general question, and hopefully you guys will be able to answer it. Is this functionality Platform9 or Spinnaker? I guess there was a little bit of confusion there.
Yeah, so it's Spinnaker. So this is anything you're seeing that is running on Platform9. Think of it as the same thing as running on pure upstream Kubernetes. We are just a middleman that is bootstrapping the Kubernetes environment for SaaS-based management. So we're able to remotely monitor it. But if, for example, you're provisioning Kubernetes on AWS, it's just running on EC2 instances. If you're provisioning it in Azure, it's just running on Azure resources. If you're provisioning it on-premise, it's just running it on your bare metal nodes, VMware. So it's installed as upstream Kubernetes. It's not a Platform9 specific feature. We are able to deliver and deploy any open source technology, any CICD toolchain like Jenkins, Spinnaker, anything that you'd like on it. And that is fully what you saw was Spinnaker's functionality. It's not like a built-in feature tab for Platform9. It's just
awesome.
Running on Kubernetes.
All right, great. Well, that's actually a perfect segue to the next question, which is, what is the difference between upstream Kubernetes and Platform9 Kubernetes?
Nothing. So the difference, I guess, would be versioning support. So we typically are, so upstream Kubernetes will support a specific version. I believe we're on 115 now. Platform9 will deliver the same upstream Kubernetes code branch, but is typically n-1 with what is released. So 114 and 113 will be supported. Then as we progress into our 8-week development cycles, we would have 115 support when 116 was out, and so on. So we're typically n-1, n-2 behind the version in the community. But as far as when you actually go to deploy it, it's the same exact Kubernetes that version that you're deploying.
Okay, great. Just a quick reminder to the audience here, if you got a question, go ahead and get it in. We still have plenty of time for questions. I would love to hear what you guys have to ask. So related question is, what is the difference between upstream Spinnaker and OpsMx Spinnaker?
Yeah, so we support the upstream Spinnaker. We provide a value as an additional microservice. If I remember my answer before, 10 microservices is what Spinnaker is. We have another microservice called Autopilot, which does lifecycle management of Spinnaker, automated verification, audit and compliance features for Spinnaker, few other value adds, app onboarding, etc. So it's basically an add-on microservice that runs alongside Spinnaker that provides those values. We also open source a lot of the things we do. For example, we added a Terraform stage that we built, that we open sourced as part of the community. We built an operator for Spinnaker that we open source. So we do a lot of open sourcing, but there are some portions that we right now at least keep it as our offering, additional offering on part of Spinnaker. But it's fully open source, 100% upstream. No forking.
Okay. All right, great. Next question. Can we patch Kubernetes clusters using Spinnaker?
Patch Kubernetes cluster. Gopi, I'm not sure you're on the call. Maybe you can answer the question.
Yes, you can. So one of the things that Spinnaker also supports is by default, we support this immutable server deployments. So that's why it's ideal for deployment to Kubernetes, even in the environments like AWS and GCP. That's the ideal way to deploy for supporting rollbacks and blue-green kind of deployments. But theoretically, you can use it to upgrade Kubernetes too. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. One thing, this is Kamesh here. I just wanted to clarify. The Platform9 offering actually does all of that patching and upgrading of the Kubernetes as part of our service. So we do that, and as Gopi pointed out, if you want to do it yourself, you can certainly use Spinnaker for that as well.
Perfect. Okay, great. Next question. Is it possible to choose regions for managed Kubernetes in Platform9?
Yeah, so I know we didn't have time to go through the cluster creation, but it's actually very, very robust. So you can choose regions, how many availability zones. You can bring your own custom AMI. You can bring your own security groups, bring your own networking, use existing VPCs. You can specify a very robust set of customizations, which is actually an advantage over. If you look at stuff like EKS, or you look at even AKS and some other environments, they have a very opinionated way in which you're able to deploy the environment. We allow you to configure that on day one and use existing policies, existing regions, existing security groups as needed, so that you can hit the ground running.
All right, excellent. Let's see. Next question: does Spinnaker work with AKS, EKS, etc.?
Absolutely, yeah. It supports all flavors of Kubernetes, including OpenShift and anything else. Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. Let's see. We're about 6 minutes to the top of the hour, so we have time for questions. Maybe 2 or 3 more questions. Next question: how can we manage multiple users depending on roles, which is not in Jenkins?
Yeah.
So you could.
Oh, go ahead. I think you guys. Yep.
If it's a Spinnaker related, I guess you can answer the question, I guess, because it's talking about Jenkins.
No, I think so. Let's see the question again. So
how can we manage multiple users depending on roles, which is not in Jenkins?
Got it.
So Spinnaker, you can connect to the standard role-based access control, LDAP and SAML, etc. You're able to define groups of developers, and you can fine-grainedly control who can view the application, who can create and modify applications, who can deploy applications. There's quite a bit of control that Spinnaker offers for that. But you can also answer from a Platform9 perspective.
Yep. Yeah. So we've added a centralized way to build roles and cluster roles and assign them out to multiple users and groups or namespaces and clusters simultaneously. So it's not really a hard problem to solve, but it's a very convenient one. Meaning the UI tab for RBAC that we've built is actually built on the Upstream API. So it essentially generates the YAMLs for you for those roles. So you don't have to write the operations. You don't have to write all those lines out in the YAML files. Basically, every single operation permitted in the role or the cluster role is selectable, is definable. And then when you go to assign it to a particular group, whether it be LDAP, OIDC, if it's whatever provider that you would like to use, it would go and assign out those bindings to those users and those groups. And the nice part of it is you can create a single role and say, I want to create the same role in 10 other namespaces. And we're adding the functionality to do that for cluster roles. So if you have 20 clusters and you create a single cluster role, you should have the ability to apply it to multiple clusters as well. So we're trying to make that operational burden a little bit easier.
All right, great. Let's see, next question, which may be the last question. Is it possible to use the Kubernetes service discovery for non-Kubernetes instances?
Yeah, so I'm imagining you're talking about doing ingress to probably data workloads that are sitting on premises or databases that might be not sitting in Kubernetes, but your web services might be speaking to those. In the case of doing that, you would want to set up a robust ingress setup where you use a combination of DNS and load balancing to do this. So Kubernetes service discovery obviously works very well within the Kubernetes environment, but you would obviously need to do some setup for ingress to be able to point to things sitting outside of the cluster itself.
Okay. All right, great. So we're about 3 minutes to the top of the hour, so we're going to have to close out the question and answer period. I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions, and if we didn't get to yours, please know that the folks at Platform9 and OpsMx will be getting a copy of all the questions. So I'm sure somebody from their organization will be more than happy to follow up with you offline to get your question answered. Also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded, so you will have the opportunity to listen to the webinar again if you missed any part of it, or if you just want to listen to it again. Please just check your email later on today. There'll be an email from us that contains a link to access the webinar on demand, and it's also going to be living on the devops.com website, so you can always go there. Just go to webinar, devops.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Before we close things out, I do want to announce the 3 winners of today's Amazon gift card drawing. And without further ado, our first winner is Gareth Greener. Congratulations, Gareth. Our second winner is I apologize if I mispronounce your name, but Amilcar Arevalo. Congratulations. And then our final winner is Massimo Vanucci. Congratulations to all 3 of you, and thanks for attending today. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Kamesh, Eric, and Balaji, thank you so much for giving such a great presentation. Lots of good information here. And judging from the number of questions we got, I know the audience got a lot out of it also. So thanks again, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Also want to thank the audience for joining me today. And this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody.